The Mufti justified his regicidal fatwa by the authority of the sentence and the law, which says, if there are two caliphs, let one of them be put off to death. A sentence which Van Hammer terms a proposition to shudder at in the law of Islam, a proposition which arbitrarily applied and extended sanctions the execution not only of all the deposed sovereigns, but also of all princes whose existence seems to menace the master of the throne with rivalry. It is the bloody authorization of the state maxim of the Ottomans for the murder of kings, brothers, sons, and fathers. The principal foreign events of the reign of Ibrahim were the siege of Azov and the commencement of the long war with the Venetians called the War of Candia. The important city of Azov, which commands the navigation of the sea of the name and gives to its occupiers great advantages for warlike operations in the Crimea and along all the coast of the Euxine, had, at the time of Ibrahim's accession, been for 4 years in the possession of the Cossacks of the vicinity, who were nominal subjects of the Russian Tsar. Ibrahim's first vizier Kara Mustafa was well aware of the necessity of maintaining the Turkish power northward of the Black Sea, and in 1641 a strong army and fleet left Constantinople for the recovery of Azov. This expedition was aided by a Tatar force under the Khan of Crim. The Cossacks defended the place bravely, and after a siege of 3 months, the Turks were obliged to retire with a loss of 7,000 Janissaries and of multitude of auxiliary Wallachians, Moldavians, and Tartars, whom the Ottoman historians do not enumerate. A fresh expedition was sent in at next year, and on this occasion Mohammed Giray, the Crimean Khan, led no less than 100 Tatars to Azov to cooperate with the regular Turkish troops. The Cossacks found themselves unable to resist such a force. The Tsar refused to aid them and sent an embassy from Moscow to Ibrahim, renouncing all concern with Azov and desiring to renew the old amity between Russia and the Porte. In this emergency, the Cossack garrison, with the same ferocious energy which their race has often displayed, set fire to the city which they could no longer defend, and left the heap of Russian ruins for the Turks and Tatars to occupy. The Ottoman general rebuilt the city and fortified it anew with care commensurate with the importance of the post. A garrison of 26,000 men, including 20 companies of Janissaries, with a numerous train of artillery, was left under Islam Pasha to protect the Turkish interests in this region. The incessant attacks of the Cossacks on the Turkish and of the Tatars on the Russian territories were the subjects of frequent complaints between the courts of Moscow and Constantinople during Ibrahim's reign. Each sovereign required the other to keep his lawless vassals to check. The Tsar Alexis Mikhailovich protested against being held responsible for the acts of the Cossacks whom, in a letter to the Sultan, he termed a horde of malefactors who had withdrawn as far as possible from the reach of their sovereign power, in order to escape the punishment due to their crimes. The Sultan and the Vizier, on the other hand, required that no one on the side of Russia should do the least damage to aught that belonged to a subject in the Sublime Porte, either on the Sea of Azov or the Black Sea. The pretext of shifting the blame on the Cossacks and, in general, all excuses were to be inadmissible on condition of this being done and of the Tsar paying the ancient tribute to the Khan of the Crimea. The Sultan promised not to aid the Tartars against Moscow, but whatever the foreign might right or deserve, still the system of border war between Cossacks or Tartars was carried on, and the Turkish and Russian troops more than once came into collision north of the Euxine in Ibrahim's time, while protecting their irregular confederates or seeking redress of themselves. In 1646, the Tartars pursued the Cossacks into the southern provinces of Russia and brought away 3,000 prisoners whom they sold for slaves at Prekop. Perekop. A Russian army advanced against Azov to avenge that affront, but was beaten in the several actions by Musa Pasha at the Turkish garrison, who sent 400 prisoners and 800 Muscovites to Constantinople as trophies of their success. The Crim Khan Islam Giray was more bitter against the Russian than was his master the Sultan, and boldly refused to obey orders from Constantinople not to molest those whom he regarded as the natural enemies of the Turkish Empire. He had early in 1648 made an incursion into Poland and Russia, and carried off 40,000 subjects of those realms into slavery. The Polish and Russian sovereigns sent ambassadors to the Sublime Porte to ask redress, and Ibrahim dispatched two of his officers to the Crimea with a letter to the Khan, in which he was commanded to collect the Christian prisoners whom he had seized in violation of all treaties and to send them to Constantinople that they might be given up to the representatives of their governments. Khan Giray read the letter and coldly replied, "I and all here are the Sultan's servants, but the Russians only desire peace in appearance. They only ask for it while they feel the weight of our victorious arms. If we give them breathing time, they ravage the coast of Anatolia with their squadrons. I have more than once represented to the Divan that there were two neglected strong places in this neighborhood, which it would be prudent for us to occupy. Now the Russians have made themselves masters of them, and they have raised more than 20 little fortified posts. If we are to remain inactive this year, they will seize Ackerman and conquer Moldavia." With this answer, the Sultan's messengers were obliged to return to Constantinople. The immediate occasion of the War of Candia was the offense given in 1644 to the Sultan by the capture of rich fleet of merchant vessels, which was voyaging from Constantinople to Egypt. The captors were Maltese, not Venetian galleys, but they anchored with their prizes in the road of Kelismen on the south coast of Candia, which had now been in the possession of the Venetians since the time of the Fourth Crusade. When, on partitioning the conquered Greek Empire, they purchased that important island from their fellow crusader the Marquis of Montserrat, to whom it had first been allotted as his portion of the scarce spoil. Sultan Ibrahim was maddened with rage when he heard of the capture of the Turkish ships, some of which were the property of one of the chief eunuchs of the imperial household. He threatened the destruction of the whole Christian name and ordered armaments to be instantly dispatched against the Maltese knights. But his officers persuaded him not to renew the enterprise in which the great Suleiman had failed so signally against the barren and strongly fortified rock of Malta, and rather to turn his arms to the acquisition of the rich and valuable isle of Candia. They pointed out to him that Candia was most advantageously situated for incorporation with the Ottoman dominions, and that it might be easily wrested by surprise from its Venetian masters, who had given just cause for hostilities by allowing the practical Maltese to secure their booty on the Cretan coast. It was resolved accordingly by the Porte to attack Candia. There was at that time peace between Turkey and Venice. Ibrahim and his ministers determined to aid force by fraud, and they pretended to receive most graciously the excuses which the Republic of the Cinque offered for the accidental reception of the Maltese galleys at Callismene. A large fleet and army left the Dardanelles on the 30th April 1645, with the declared object of assailing Malta, but after the expedition had paused for a time on the south coast of the Morea, the Generalissimo Yusuf Pasha put to sea again, read to his assembled captains the Sultan's orders, which had previously been kept secret, and instead of sailing westward for Malta, stood to the south with the favorable wind, which brought the Turkish squadron to Canea, at the western extremity of the Isle of the Candia, on the 24th of June. The suspicious of the Venetian government as to the real object of the expedition had not been wholly quieted by the protestations of the Sultan's ministers. Orders had been sent from Venice to put the fortresses of the islands in a state of defense, and to collect the militia, and the reinforcement had been sent to the garrison. But the native population hated the rule of the Venetian oligarchy and the troops and galleys under the governor's command were inadequate for the defense of so long a line of a seaboard as great presence on to an invader. The Turks landed without opposition and came to the principal city of the western part of the island, was besieged and captured by them before the end of August. In the following year, They took Retino, and in the spring of 1648 they began to siege of Candia, the capital of the island. This memorable siege was prolonged for 20 years by the desperate exertions of the Venetians, who strained their utmost resources to rescue Candia. They frequently inflicted severe and humiliating defeats on the Turkish squadrons. They even captured the islands of Lemnos and Tenedos from the Ottomans and more than once ravaged the coast near Constantinople, but they were never able to drive away the besieging army from before Candia through the operations of Turks were retarded and often paralyzed by the imbecility and corruption of the Supreme Porte throughout the reign of Ibrahim and the first part of that of his son Mohammed IV, whose elevation to the throne at the age of 7 years when his fatah was deposed and murdered has been already narrated. It would be useless to dwell on the internal history of Turkey during Muhammad IV's minority and to recapitulate the ever-recurring incidents of court intrigue, military insubordination and violence, judicial venality, local oppression, and provincial revolt. The strife of the factions was aggravated by the deadly rivalry that sprang up between the old Sultan Valide, the Sultan's grandmother, and his mother, the young Sultan Valide, whose name was Turkhan, a rivalry which led to the murder of the elder princess. As no stronger foe than Venice attacked the Ottoman Empire, it lingered on the throne this period of renewed misery and weakness until at length in 1656 through the influence of the Sultan Turkhan, the Grand Vizierate was given to the aged statesman named Mohammed Kupreli, who deserves to be honored as the founder of the dynasty of ministers that raised Turkey in spite of the deficiency of her princes. Once more to comparative power and properties and glory, and who long retarded, if they could not avert, the ultimate decline of the Ottoman Empire. Chapter 15. Mohammed Kupreli, rigor and success of his ministry. His son Ahmed Kupreli succeeds him in the vizierate. Great qualities of Ahmed Kupreli, weakness of Sultan Mohammed IV, war with Austria, great defeats of the Turks by Monteculli at the St. Gotthard, truce with Austria. Ahmed Kupreli takes Candia, war with Russia and Poland. Sobieski defeats the Turks at Kochim, and Lemberg, piece of Zurauna, deed and character of Ahmed Koprili. The court astronomer at Constantinople on September 15, 1656, determined that the most favorable time for the investiture of Mohammed Koprili with the Grand Vizierate was the hour of the midday prayer at the instant when the cry of God is great, resounds from the highest of the minarets. According to the prescribed rule of Islam, the noontide prayer is repeated not at the exact moment when the sun is on the meridian, but a few seconds afterwards, because the tradition of the prophets teaches that at the astronomical noon the devil is wont to take the sun between his two horns, so that he may wear it as the crown of the world's dominion, and the fiend then rears himself as lord of the earth, but he lets the sun go directly he hears the words God is great, repeated on high in the summons of the true believers to prayer. Thus, says the Turkish historian, the demons of cruelty, debauchery, and sedition, who had reached the meridian and the reign of Amurath and Ibrahim, and during the minority of Mahomet were obliged to yield up their crown of domination when the voice was heard that proclaimed Khopri Grand Vizier of the empire. Mohammed Koprili was the grandson of an Albanian who had migrated to Asia Minor and settled off the town of Kypri near the mouth of the river Halis. The ruler of the councils of the Ottoman Empire had been in early use of kitchen boy, from which situation he rose to that of a cook. After 25 years of service he became the steward of the Grand Vizier Khosrev, and under Khosrev's successor he was made master of the horse. That successor favored Khopri as being a native of the same province as himself, and by his influence Khopri was made governor in Damascus, Tripoli, and Jerusalem, and one of the viziers of state. Afterwards he accepted the inferior post of Sanjak Bey of Giustendil in Albania, where he led an armed force against some of the numerous insurgents of that region, but was defeated and taken prisoner after he was redeemed from captivity. He retired to his native town, but was pursued by a pasha called Mohammed with the neck to follow him to Constantinople. His new patron became Grand Vizier, but soon began to regard Khopri as a dangerous rival from the court favor. It does not, however, appear that Khopri used any unfair intrigues to obtain the Grand Vizierate. Friends, who know the firmness of his character, his activity, and his keen common sense, recommended him to the Sultana Valide as a man who might possibly restore some degree of tranquillity to the suffering empire, and the Grand Vizierate was offered to Khopri then in the 70th year of his age. He refused to accept it, save upon certain conditions. He required that all his measures should be ratified without examination or discussion, that he should have free hands in the distribution of all offices and preferments, and in dealing out rewards and punishments without attending to recommendations from any quarter, and without any responsibility, that he should have authority superior to all influence of great men or favorites, that exclusive confidence should be placed in him, and all accusations and insinuations insinuations against him should be instantly rejected. The Sultana Walide, in behalf of her son, swore solemnly that all these conditions should be fulfilled, and Muhammad Kubrili became Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire. His former patron, Mohammed the Wry-Necked, had been dismissed to make from room for him, and the court had ordered that the deposed minister should be put to death, and that his goods should be confiscated in the unusual manner. Kiprile in, interceded and saved his life, and gave him the revenues of the government of Kanisha. This was the first, and it was almost the last act of humanity that marked Capri's administration. A stern correction of abuses was required, and Capri applied it, not indeed with the ostentatious cruelty of Sultan Amuras IV, but with the same searching and unsparing severity with which had marked that monarch's rule. Kipling took the precaution of compelling the Mufti to sign a fatwa sanctioning and anticipation all the Grand Vizier's measures, and then employed the most effectuous means for ridding the empire of all who disturbed or threatened public order. A number of fanatical sheikhs and dervishes who troubled Constantinople by their tumults and their lawless violence against all who did not comply with their dogmas, were seized and banished. One of them, who murmured against the vizier, and who had great influence with the populace, was strangled and thrown into the Bosphorus. Kyoprili intercepted a letter from the Greek patriarch to the voivoda of Wallachia, containing a prediction very similar to those which are frequent in our own time. The Patriarch said, "The power of Islam is drawing to an end. The Christian faith will soon be supreme. All their lands will speedily be in the possession of the Christians, and the lords of the cross and the church bell will be lords of the empire." Coprily read this and encouragement to revolt, and hanged the Greek patriarch over one of the city gates. No delinquencies past or present, no preparation for plot or mutiny, escaped the vizier's vigilance. The planted his spies in every province and town, and secured the agency of trusty and unquestioning executioners of his commands. The Empress of a resolute will was felt throughout the empire, and men obeyed without hesitation the man whom they perceived never to hesitate himself, never to neglect or abandon those who served him, and never to forgive those who thwarted or disobeyed him. Cupid dealt his blows against every race, class, profession, and station, where he saw or suspected offense. He never vented his wrath in threats. His blows outsped his words, and while he was biding his time to strike, he was of unrivaled skill in disguising his preparations. The Turkish historian Naima relates on the authority of Mejipi, who had been one of the Grand Vizier's confidential servants, that Muhammad Kuprili had a maxim that wrath and reproach are always superfluous and frequently dangerous for the possessor of power. That is the silly for a statesman to fly out into a passion, and that lulling a victim to sleep is the safest way to killing him.